Hello, everyone. I'm Branden Bodendorfer, and you are on Focus. And today we're going to be talking to Ron Wilczek, a commercial lending manager at Forward Financial Bank. Over the last several weeks, we've been covering this pandemic in central Wisconsin and how it relates to you. We've dived in and met with community leaders in different organizations, trying to give you the information that matters most. And we think this episode, if you're a business owner or an entrepreneur or someone that's self-employed, is going to be one you're going to want to pay attention to. So without further ado, I'll welcome to the show, Ron Wilczek. How you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Well, Ron, we covered this about a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months ago. Time has kind of stretched by me a little bit. I don't know if today is Wednesday, Thursday, or Sunday. I don't think it's Sunday because I didn't go to church this morning. But you recently had a promotion at Forward Bank. Is that true?
Yeah, correct. I'm now the commercial lending manager for our commercial lending team for the bank in all of our locations. We've got 9 locations throughout central and also northern Wisconsin. So I've got about a team of, 10 people are reporting to me. And what an interesting time to take over.
Yeah.
Get a promotion, all of a sudden you're dealing with, a pandemic and increased workload and demands for everybody on our team.
Absolutely. From everybody that I've heard, the banking industry is really, especially those that are partners with the SBA, are really taking on a lot right now, working a lot overtime. Obviously with the current program, that the renewal of the PPP, the second wave of funding that came out, it was actually sent out Monday afternoon by the SBA that says, hey, we are getting a huge amount of load. Over 4,000 different SBA partners are submitted over 100,000 applications in the first few hours. And they actually encourage those lenders to work off peak to help push those loans or those applications through the system. So I have to imagine you guys are doing no different, working off peak, trying to take care of your customers and those that, maybe are not your customer or has been customer in the past, but someone that's inquiring about this program now.
Yeah, we've been working tirelessly. Round one, it was days, nights, weekends, just trying to get through the demand of applications. And, we got a little bit of a chance to kind of catch our breath and pause, after the funding of round one ran out. And then, as you mentioned, Monday, the switch got turned back on again. And, we've seen a little bit of a less volume of applications because a lot of them were a little more proactive on round one. However, we are getting a lot of applications for self-employed, independent contractors, things like that during round two. And we're doing a pretty good job of trying to keep up with the influx of applications and requests.
So touch a little bit on round one. When the light got turned off or the faucet dried up, did you guys still have applications that you were hoping to process?
Yeah, I don't remember the exact number, but we got through the lion's share of ones that, we had actual applications. We had talked to a lot of people that, hadn't submitted applications, wanted to learn more about the program. But we did, I think our round one total was over 450 applications, during that 13-day period. So it was hard work. It wasn't banker's hours, during that 13 days, but it also felt good helping a lot of, local businesses, nonprofit organizations, throughout the area.
I'm just kind of chuckling a little bit. You said banker's hours and trying to think what banker's hours are these days anymore.
Yeah, it's an old term and it's outdated. Let's just say that.
Yeah, so I think it's important, Ronnie, you touched on it, trying to help businesses in our community. They are really kind of the backbone of what makes a community, thrive. And, I look at this situation and, there's a lot of different vendors not a lot of different banking institutions that are coming forward and really supporting this program and putting a lot of extra effort into it. And I think goes on knowing this is a federal funded program. But at the moment, it's a program that's really being funded by the local financial institutions. Have you guys received any money yet from the federal government for this program?
No, we have not. So it's been funded by our local depositors and our existing capital.
And I think that's just important to kind of pay attention because before we get too far into this show and really kind of dive into some of the things that are going to help out those small business owners in general, or even those contractors or independents, for those that don't really fall into that world, you can do a lot to help those local financial institutions by making sure that your deposit accounts and you're working with those banks, because this situation might hit the whole globe, but we're relying on our local partners to make, this particular situation or opportunity available for so many. And this program that we're going to talk about today is the PPP, which is the Payroll Protection Program, which is really a retention program for employers to incentivize them to retain their employees. And I think that's what's really, really unique, because it's not necessarily about businesses getting stimulus, but 75% or greater of the funds that they're receiving is supposed to go right back into staffing their business and making sure that their employees are continuing to get paychecks for at least the next 8 weeks from the time they receive funding. So let's talk about the program in general, Ron. Let's just say I'm a new customer, someone that just first inquiring about this, and I call you and say, hey, Ron, been hearing about this PPP program. What should I know? Do I qualify? Is this right for me? What are some of those first minute conversations that you're having with customers and small business owners?
Yeah, it's right for, most organizations and self-employed people that we've talked to. Most businesses have been negatively impacted by, the pandemic. The biggest challenge that we've seen is those that maybe are non-essential, right? So you can apply for the loan, but the challenge is you take the money, you acknowledge that you've been negatively impacted, you take the money, however, the money has to be used for payroll costs. And if you're not able to operate, do you bring your employees back and pay them to nothing? So that's been the big, question mark. Other than that, most companies qualify as long as, you have, payroll wages that can be used to determine payroll costs, which ultimately determines the actual maximum loan amount.
Yeah, and you talk about that, bringing your employees back to work. I've talked to a couple of business owners that applied for this and received it, and their employees are working outside the office. So what they've been seeing is this has also been a way for them to kind of help cover some of the extra costs that they're incurring, because employees aren't working as efficiently. They're having to spend more time really doing projects because of network activity or being able to communicate with each other inside the office. So this has been able to help them weather that storm. But it's also a great time too, if you're able to use some of these dollars. Maybe you had a dip in cash flow and you don't see the business to the level it was prior to, February 15th. And now is a time where you're thinking, oh, geez, I only need 70 or 80% of my staff. Are you a business owner that's thinking, well, maybe I can use these funds, retool the business in a sense, keep everybody at 100%, but look at some things when we come out of this pandemic. Is my marketing up to date? Is my operations up to date? Is there any seasonal tasks that I can really address? Maybe it's maintenance in my facilities, just to give that staff the ability to have, work and retain them, but also try to harbor some of those expenses or create some opportunities for you long-term. When you're talking to some of these businesses, and let's talk about some of those independent contractors, because when the program first came out, they weren't really a part of it. Those businesses that really, I'm going to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't actually have reported wages per se. Through that first couple of weeks, that was addressed. And you mentioned that now in the second wave, that is the first people that you're seeing. Are you seeing them more now because they're starting to understand the program, or is it because people just in general don't quite understand the program and if they qualify?
Yeah, I don't know, what's prompting more of those calls now than early. Some might have been, they knew that they weren't able to apply during the first week of round one of the PPP loan program. And then I think it was April 10th was the day the self-employeds and the independent contractors could apply. And, I think there was only about 4 or 5 business days before those funds ran out. And I think that got a lot of publicity. And, I think that's why there's been increased demand the last week or so from those folks.
So when we talk about applying, how hard is the application? How long does it take? What documents should you as a business, if you're listening to this right now and you're saying, I haven't applied, Ron's telling me from the sounds of it that I'm eligible. I'm going to get off this podcast. What are some of the first things that those individuals should be doing?
Boy, that's a great question. And honestly, the PPP loan application is quite simple. That's perhaps a little different than most SBA applications. It's very user friendly. It basically asks for information about your business, your EIN number, asks you to calculate your average monthly payroll, which only the owner can really determine. It can be verified by the bank subsequent to that, but really they're kind of taking a close look at their payroll costs, timesing it by 2.5, and that's your loan amount. And then basically they're certifying, to many different things in terms of size of the business, number of employees, affiliations, are they being impacted by, the pandemic, things like that. But I mean, honestly, the application can probably be completed in 10 minutes or so. As far as supporting documentation, what's really nice is if the business can share their payroll forms, the 941s and the 940, which is the annual compilation of the 941s. If they are going to try to include any other benefit costs, things like that, to document that. There are some people that, it's capped at, $100,000 in wages. So if the company would have, employees that make more than $100,000, it's kind of important to show some math in terms of, stopping at that number, so the banker can clearly identify the math you use to calculate the loan amount. It just speeds the process up. If the documentation isn't complete or it's unclear, there's more back and forth, conversations, emails, things like that, which delays the process.
So the program itself is over the course of 8 weeks. From the time you are funded, you have 8 weeks to use the money to be eligible for forgiveness. You said there that it's calculated in an application that wages are over 2 months times 2.5, or the average of 2 months times 2.5. Mm-hmm. So traditionally speaking, 8 weeks is usually only about 2 months. So what's that extra percentage, or that extra, I don't want to call it a bonus, but why not just say, hey, here's an average for 2 months? Why the 2.5? Yeah,
I don't know what the SBA's motivation for that was. I do know that as far as forgiveness, 75% of the loan has to be used for payroll costs. I mean, that's the purpose of the program, is paycheck protection, to keep employees working or bring those back that the company decided to lay off. You are able to, as an owner, to have mortgage interest, rent costs, and also utilities forgiven as part of that calculation. That can only be about 25% of the total loan amount. The one thing about the forgiveness portion, it remains unclear what the calculation is going to be or what the required documentation is. We've got guidelines from the SBA, but they haven't come out and given banks specific instructions on how to calculate the forgiveness amount. We've been telling customers, I think it's going to be kind of a prove it mentality, where they need to keep detailed records, have a good tracking mechanism, maintain your supporting documentation. There's going to be an employee retention test. They're going to want to know, is your FTE count the same or more, after the 8-week period as it was, prior to COVID. And then they want to know that you didn't decrease the pay for your current employees. So those are kind of the three things that are going to be used in the forgiveness calculation. We just don't know what documentation or what, we're going to be asked to do on behalf of the SBA.
You touched on a couple of things, and maybe you can expand on them for me a little bit. You said, is your FTEs at the same level or more start of the program? Are they expecting that once the 8 weeks is done, that, say you entered this and you had 10 employees, are they expecting you to come out of the 8 weeks and maintain those 10 employees for the same period of time? Or are they simply saying that you need to retain those 10 employees during the 8 weeks?
Yeah, it's just they want to maintain the employee count. Now, for some reason, it doesn't make business sense to do that. It just could impact the forgiveness amount. Again, we have not received specific clarification from the SBA, unfortunately. So we're kind of just guessing in some regard. but the whole goal is to keep employees working or bring them back to work.
So knowing all that and still trying to learn what some of the forgiveness is, and we'll talk about forgiveness here a little bit more. Do you, in general, who do you encourage to apply for this? What businesses are really good candidates for this program that if they haven't already, that you would say, hey, you were the type of individual, organization, or business that really should be, connecting with us or connecting with another SBA partner or a financial institution that, can help service this in our area today, tomorrow morning at the latest, to really see if this is something that makes sense for you?
Yeah, we've seen businesses apply all shapes and sizes, different industries. I guess the big thing is, have they been negatively impacted by the pandemic? And if they can provide the supporting documentation, they can certainly, send the information in and qualify and apply for a loan. It's a very broad brush in terms of who qualifies.
And when you speak of who qualifies and forgiveness and such, what about the owner operator? Are they able to take their own wages from this pool?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I think that's key to know too. So, even if you are a family run business or you're a smaller institution, you're playing a key role as an owner operator. This is a good program to keep you moving forward too. What about those businesses? You talked about some of the applications and some of the needs. Does with the IRS saying that, hey, taxes aren't due now until July 15th, I believe. Have you had businesses that came forward and said, hey, I don't have my taxes for 2019 filed yet? Does that make me eligible or uneligible?
No, not at all. Tax return is not a required document for the PPP loan. Payroll documentation is required. So even if your tax return for 2019 isn't filed and completed yet, a company should still have payroll records. So that can be used, I shouldn't say in lieu of, but that's all we need basically to verify the loan amount, which is calculated by the payroll costs.
And what about new businesses? Obviously in America, being an entrepreneur and, making that next step is an exciting time. And there's, new businesses in Marshfield that I've seen started since the first of the year or even into the late part of the fourth quarter, to be hit with this pandemic. And then basically at 2:00 one day saying, hey, at 5:00, you're closing your doors or you're limiting your services to a certain level. Those businesses, are they eligible if they haven't been through maybe a full quarter? And I know from some of the applications, we keep referencing to this February 15th date. Are they saying that if you were in business by February 15th, if you have some record, you're eligible? Have you ran any of those situations?
Yeah, that's the key date. I'd have to really review like the operating procedure for the SBA, but my understanding is you have to have been in business operating on February 15th. If you started prior to that and you're running, obviously you won't have 2019 payroll information if you started in 2020. So there are some exceptions to the general rules in terms of calculating payroll costs. And it's in the operating procedure. So if anybody started a business, and they were open prior to February 15th, they could certainly, go into the SBA Gov website and find the operating procedures. I'm not an expert in it. I don't review that stuff every single day. And obviously that's a small percentage of the applications that we've seen would be brand new businesses. Most have been in business for a while.
For sure. Absolutely. But if there's some of them that's out there, we should ask the question. So we've said this a couple of times. Probably the key word that we've been using is the word forgiveness. And I have to imagine that is probably one of the biggest questions that you are getting is, what does this forgiveness mean? It's as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, it's probably one of the scariest things, but yet like one of those things you might say, is this for real? Are you really going to forgive up to 8 weeks of payroll cost? And I think from the people that I've talked to, that has been probably the biggest, not scare, but reason why they haven't taken a step forward and said, well, I'm going to apply for this. When you're faced with that question, how are you answering it to customers?
Yeah, that's our biggest question right now is, tell me about the forgiveness calculation. Early on in the process was, tell me about the program. How does it work? How do I apply? Things like that. Now, we've funded a lot of loans already. So now the question is, okay, what's next? And the clock starts ticking the day the loan is funded. Unfortunately, we don't have clear guidance from the SBA just been kind of reiterating, like I mentioned before, it's important to keep detailed records, have a good tracking mechanism, keep your supporting documentation, again, keep track of your number of employees, things like that. Because at some point in the relatively near future, we're going to have conversations about, the loan forgiveness amount. Unfortunately, we're kind of speaking in generalities until we get specific guidelines from the SBA. I think the SBA was focused so much on the front end of this program, obviously getting it rolling, answering questions about the application process, who's eligible. The back end of the program didn't get a lot of attention, but it needs to soon, because that 8 weeks is going to fly by rather quickly, and we're going to be tasked with working on those forgiveness calculations.
Yeah, and you say keep good records. Do you encourage people to open up a separate checking account for those funds?
It's not, as far as I know, it's not required. We've had a handful of businesses opening up a separate checking account, but I don't know the exact number, but I bet it's been less than 1 or 2% of the businesses. I think as long as they maintain accurate records, they're going to be able to clearly document how that money was spent. So I don't know if it's a recommended practice, but a few companies have decided to go that route.
Gotcha. Have there been any recommendations that have come down from like the Association of Bankers in Wisconsin on what their recommendations are to try to say, okay, as Wisconsin banks and financial institutions, here's what we suggest you guys should be telling your customers? Or are really each financial institution kind of really out there trying to interpret the law or the program on their own means?
Yeah, I think a little bit of both. The WBA has been on the forefront of the SBA program. We've been getting bulletins from them, daily emails, webinars, things like that. They do the best they can to interpret and advise banks. But again, until you get a detailed clarification from the governing body, you really don't know how to proceed. And then I think banks also have a lot of discretion. I shouldn't say a lot, but some discretion how they want to interpret things, and even how to roll out the program internally. This thing happened so quick, and banks had to create workflows and procedures, on the fly to handle, this huge demand of applications. And, there wasn't guidance from the SBA. Every bank is built a little bit different, and just had to make some quick decisions and, work hard on and helping customers. So a little bit of both, I guess, to answer your question.
So in recap, if you're a business or a small business entrepreneur, self-contractor, independent worker, and you apply for this, you receive the funds. What is the worst case scenario? At the end of the 8 weeks, do you have to pay it back? Can you take out a loan over the course of a period of time? I mean, if you don't use this money directly for payroll and you don't get forgiven it, what's your options then?
Yeah, well, the worst case scenario would be if none of it is forgiven, right? You'd have the entire loan amount balance remaining, and you'd basically have 24 months total to pay it back. It's 6 months interest only, and then followed by principal interest payments thereafter at a relatively low, at a very low interest rate of 1%.
1% interest rate. That doesn't happen very often for businesses.
It's hard to say, right?
And I imagine that relationship and those payments, are they working with their local financial institution, or are they working with the SBA at that time?
Yep, they're working with their local bank. The loan documents are, local bank documents. Payments would be sent to the local bank. So yeah, it's something that the SBA really is out of that transaction at that point.
So the case could even be that if maybe you received, 20, 30, 50, $100,000, whatever the number is, maybe you were able to be forgiven 80% of that funds. You would have a small loan at an ultra low interest rate that you'd be able to term out for 24 months.
Exactly.
So overall, I mean, the program from my view and from a view from a lot of people that I've talked to is it's a good program. Over the course of, you look at what the program was and how many, was it $350 billion in the first wave that was rolled out in 14 or 15 days. There has been some bumps, but it's been probably pretty smooth when you think about the dollars and money. I had one person tell me on Monday of this week, there was $800,000 that was being processed every second from the time that the SBA opened a portal to like 4 p.m. on Monday. So that's an incredible amount of money going into stimulus. Have you seen, or do you believe that this stimulus program is going to give at least our area an opportunity to kind of like just take a breath and really kind of just, keep the lights on and move forward for a decent period of time?
Yeah, I think, you can argue whether or not this program was rolled out efficiently, effectively, but the fact of the matter is $349 billion of capital was deployed in 13 or 14 days. And I can't remember if I read this or heard this, but I think the number of SBA loans funded in 14 days was more than it was funded in the last 14 years by the SBA. So just an incredible amount of loans. And yes, it's going to help a lot of local businesses that have been negatively impacted. It's going to help them keep their doors open. It's going to help employees remain employed. Trickle down economics. So it's been a great thing, and it's been rewarding to just kind of be the conduit between the SBA and the customer to get capital in a lot of local businesses' hands.
So I'm sure you've had many conversations with businesses that have applied for this and have been able to be accepted, and those that were funded, as you mentioned. Have you had conversations with business owners that at the end of the day they weren't eligible or weren't able to apply for the application?
I have not personally. Everybody that I've talked to qualified for a loan. One thing they have to do is be in good standing with the, from our interpretation, with the Wisconsin DFI. So, if they're not in good standing, they need to get that rectified ASAP to qualify. Myself, everybody I've talked to is qualified, have been eligible. I have talked to my colleagues to see if they've had conversations with some companies that haven't been eligible.
Gotcha. So outside the PPP, is there anything that your financial institution is doing for businesses that may be facing a hardship, or is there other programs that maybe people should be considering if the PPP maybe isn't right for them because, maybe they're not ready to bring their employees back, to full-time status for a period of time because their doors are closed or they're just not able to conduct business in their normal capacity?
Yeah, great question. Before the PPP loan program was discussed and even approved, and we were having discussions, as a bank and internally, how can we help our customers? So, we were doing deferrals before the PPP loan program started, or even interest-only payments for some customers to kind of ease the burden. Some of those documents were signed and put in place before the PPP loan program. That being said, once this loan program kicked off, those conversations kind of, slowed down, and the PPP loan program was helping companies kind of operate as close to normal as possible, and payment relief wasn't something they were needed, since they were able to, get some of these funds.
Understandable. Thank you for that input, Ron.
Yep.
Ron, before we go, what other information do you feel maybe we didn't share, or conversations that you may have had with businesses that we didn't really bring light to that we should discuss?
Boy, that's a great question. I just think, one thing I'm proud of is just like how hard, our team here worked, to help businesses. And I know the same goes for other banks, that are doing the exact same thing. It was all hands on deck here. I'm sure it was all hands on deck at every bank, processing these things to get money out the door. So that's the one thing that I'm just so proud of is, everybody had, an attitude of what can I do to help? We actually, and most banks have, limited bandwidth, limited capacity. And that's been our biggest challenge is just, getting through the pipeline. And we've had people that normally don't prepare loan documents raise their hand and say, hey, how can I help? My job isn't quote unquote essential at the bank right now. So I'm willing to step up and type loan documents to meet the increased demand. So that's really the cool thing about a lot of this internally.
Yeah, you give me chills when you said that, because this is a health pandemic, right? And it's one that's affecting all of us, no matter what side of the aisle we're on, what race or ethnicity we come from. But I have been personally just humbled and honored over the last 6 weeks to cover some of the stories that we have. I mean, I've seen neighbors helping neighbors in a capacity I've never seen. I've seen public safety officers giving heroism to our frontline workers, people in the grocery stores, truck drivers, the healthcare industry, and, you look at the banking industry. I mean, to have this, to meet the need for the businesses that are here, you guys have had to put in an extended period and extended effort of time to be able to accomplish that. And it's just one story after another that we keep getting fed. And if anything comes of this, I think even though we are, separating distance and practicing social distancing, our hearts have become so much closer to each other. And as a community and as a region and as a nation, I think we've put a lot aside to embrace humanity. So I think that's a healthy part of this. Mm-hmm. And I hope some of that sticks as we get through this and move past this, and we're able to use that connectivity to just do a lot of good things, because there's a lot of good things that are happening right now. So Ron, I do appreciate you and your team, what you guys are doing. I'm sure many, many others do. I've heard it firsthand myself from many individuals. It's important to have key players in our community just working on both ends of the stick, just to make sure things stay and the candle stays burning. Ron, thank you for being on the show. Anything last that we should that you want to cover, or if anybody has any questions, how can they connect with you?
Yeah, contact Forward Bank. Our contact information is on there, so feel free to reach out on the web. Happy to help any way we can.
Sounds good. Guys, thanks for tuning in for OnFocus. I'm Branden Bodendorfer. If you like what we're doing, go ahead, hit the subscribe button and follow our page. We'll continue to bring you the news that matters most in our community as we continue to follow this pandemic and how it's affecting each and every one of us. I'm Branden Bodendorfer. Until we see each other again. Thank you for tuning in.